In the deep, rugged heart of America's eastern mountains, where time seemed to slow and the outside world felt a distant echo, a truly extraordinary story began to unfold. It's a tale not just of a family, but of a peculiar genetic twist, almost lost to the annals of history. Imagine a life marked not just by circumstance, but by the very color of your skin, a hue of blue, distinguishing you from every soul around. For generations, in a secluded hollow known as Troublesome Creek, a unique lineage carried this remarkable characteristic. They were known, whispered about, and often feared as the Blue family. But what forces, what choices, what forgotten science led to this visible, indelible mark? This isn't merely a curious genetic anomaly, it's a profound narrative of isolation, consanguinity, and the unexpected ways human biology can adapt and reveal its deepest secrets. Join us as we uncover the astonishing true story of the Fugate family, the enigmatic Blue people of Troublesome Creek. In the heart of eastern Kentucky's mountains, a rare and peculiar story of consanguinity and a genetic condition nearly forgotten by time began to take shape. For generations, a family was marked by the blue color of their skin, a trait that would make them known as the Blue family of Troublesome Creek. The condition, which would eventually fascinate doctors and scientists, was initially stigmatized and misunderstood. But how did this lineage start, and what impact did their ancestors' choices have on future generations? What seemed to be a simple genetic phenomenon, in reality, uncovered a complex problem of consanguinity that would lead to devastating consequences. What occurs when history and science intersect? How did a lineage that began with a common practice at the time, marriage between relatives, result in such a visible and impactful condition? This is the report of the Fugate family, a blue blood history where the color of their skin was not the only factor that set them apart from the rest of society. The Fugate family's history dates back to the 19th century, specifically the year 1820, when pioneers Elizabeth Smart and Martin Fugate settled in Troublesome Creek, an isolated Kentucky hill region. Elizabeth, of English descent, and Martin Fugate, of French origin, were destined to form a lineage marked by a rare genetic phenomenon. What appeared to be a straightforward union between two members of local families would quickly become the start of a cycle of marriages between close relatives. The initial marriage between Martin and Elizabeth Fugate was not unusual for the period, especially in isolated communities where wedding options were scarce. With few other potential partners available, marriages between close relatives and cousins were common and acceptable in rural communities. What Martin and Elizabeth did not realize was that their union would give rise to a recessive gene, methemoglobinemia, which would begin to be passed down through generations, drastically altering the lives of their descendants. The phenomenon that would make the Fugate family stand out and become known as the Blue family was a rare genetic condition called methemoglobinemia, which prevented the blood from properly oxygenating. This led to a bluish skin tone because the blood had difficulty transporting oxygen to the body's cells. When Martin and Elizabeth's descendants were born, many displayed the visible trait of bluish skin, which for many was the first indication that something unusual was happening within this lineage. Methemoglobinemia results from a mutation in the gene responsible for hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen in the blood. In its most prevalent form, the gene for this condition is recessive, meaning that an individual must inherit a copy of the gene from each parent to exhibit the condition. The rare condition caused the skin of the Fugate family members to become visibly blue, particularly when exposed to natural light, a trait that soon became a marker of their family identity. As generations passed, the phenomenon of blue skin became a characteristic of the lineage, with children born with the condition due to the persistent practice of consanguineous marriages. Each generation continued to perpetuate this recessive gene until the condition spread across several generations, creating a lineage with hereditary and visible effects. Although the condition was a biological and medical curiosity, what sustained it was the continuous marriages between relatives throughout generations, including Martin and Elizabeth's descendants. As with many other marriages of the time, the options for marriage in isolated areas were limited, and the practice of marrying close relatives was a way to maintain family ties and properties. The first generation of methemoglobinemia among the Fugates resulted in a large number of children suffering from the condition. Marriages between close relatives, such as first cousins, continued over the years, perpetuating the methemoglobinemia gene. Although the consequences of consanguinity were not fully understood at the time, the marriage between Martin and Elizabeth was the first step in a long cycle that would last more than a century. The geographical isolation of the families and the lack of marriage alternatives outside the community contributed to this perpetuation, with the genetic condition becoming more and more apparent with each generation. Initially, there was no awareness that the condition was directly linked to the practice of consanguinity. For the Fugates, blue skin was simply a family characteristic, and subsequent generations did not entirely grasp the genetic consequences involved. The stigma, however, began to form as the condition spread to more family members. As the recessive gene was passed down through generations, the condition of the blue skin manifested in various ways. Although methemoglobinemia itself was not fatal, it caused health difficulties, especially in extreme situations of a lack of oxygenation and an increased susceptibility to lung diseases. Moreover, the physical condition created a social stigma that the Fugate family members had to endure over the years. Across the generations, the Fugate family began to be viewed with a look of fear and revulsion, as well as curiosity. The surrounding population, upon noticing the peculiar color of the family members' skin, began to shun them. The stigma of being different, however, was just one of the difficulties the Fugates faced. Beyond physical matters, the Fugates also faced emotional and psychological problems due to the discrimination and social isolation they suffered. The family was treated with distrust, being stigmatized and marginalized for something they could not control. It was only in the 20th century, when descendants of the Fugate family began to move beyond Troublesome Creek, that the true impact of methemoglobinemia and its connection to consanguinity began to be understood. At that time, geneticists and doctors began to study the family's case and recognized that the condition was perpetuated due to the continuous practice of consanguineous marriages. The Fugate family's history has become a crucial reference for scientific studies on consanguinity and the genetic effects of methemoglobinemia. It was from the 1940s, with the work of geneticists who studied the Fugates, that the concept of recessive genetic conditions began to be more broadly understood. Methemoglobinemia was identified as a very rare condition resulting from the mutation of a specific gene and was linked to consanguinity. This case, alongside other investigations into genetic diseases in isolated communities, led to a greater discussion about the effects of consanguinity on physical health. Research on the Fugate case generated a series of questions about how practices such as consanguineous marriages can result in rare genetic conditions and how they influence human development. Studies on human genetics started to grow in significance, and the idea of avoiding such practices became a societal concern. What began as an isolated instance of bluish skin evolved into an important study on the effects of consanguinity on human health. However, the most surprising aspect was the legacy this study left for society in general, not just the scientific community. The public revelation about the condition and its social implications led to a new public awareness of inherited genetic conditions, and the Fugates became a reference point when discussing the relationship between genetic health and consanguinity. The Fugate family story is a clear illustration of how errors from the past, choices made by generations without an understanding of genetic effects, can profoundly impact subsequent generations. The Fugate case is a warning about the need for genetic education and how isolated communities, without the proper knowledge, may perpetuate diseases that could be prevented. Today, the Fugate family legacy is not only an example of the consequences of consanguinity but also an alert to the modern world about the importance of genetic consciousness and education. The study of their lives and the blue skin condition raised vital questions about social isolation, stigma, and the perpetuation of genetic diseases that remain relevant.